Hi, happy Friday. So today I am back with my Q&A session. If you have any questions for me, please leave them in the comments below. This is a question or something that came up in conversation with a client this week, and they were looking at a new build. So they were talking about wanting to make their new build more sustainable, more of an eco build, but they're on site already digging foundations, and they wondered if I could help with improving the eco credentials or sustainability of the building at this stage. And yes, it is possible to make changes when you're on site already, but when you've got a new build, you have got so much opportunity to create, to do many more things from a fabric first approach, which is the approach that I take to eco design, compared to the type of work that I normally do, which is a lot to do with working on existing buildings. When you have an existing building, the building's there. You've got a lot you have to work with what you've got. When you're starting from scratch, wow, you've got so much opportunity to make choices that are going to make things so much more easy, really, to achieve an eco build. So you might be wondering who I am. I'm Jane. I'm the founding director of iArchitect. I'm a chartered architect, I'm an eco refurbisher listed on the Green Register, and I'm also an accredited registrant on the RIBA Conservation Register. And because of these sort of specialisms, really, I'm interested in working with older buildings for a number of reasons. I love and I'm experienced at working with new buildings as an architect. That's, your ultimate dream really is to build your own home for most architects. And of course, I've been involved in new build projects, but largely now I work with clients of homes that are already built. Two reasons for this. A lot of people do come to me and say they'd like to build a new house, but they don't have the land yet. And so from an eco build perspective, I design based on the site and the orientation of the site. And so I need to know where I'm designing for. I don't just design a basic building plan that could go anywhere. It's very site specific and context related. So when clients come to me and they want me to design them a home, but they don't have a site yet, there is not a lot I can do to help until they've bought somewhere. So that is why I largely don't work with new build housing, because most clients struggle to find that perfect plot. There are not a lot of plots of land that you can buy. It's really difficult to find a plot of land if you want to build your own home. It's not such an easy task. I'm not saying it's not possible, of course it's possible, but it's just not so easy to do. So I often work with existing buildings, and I love that kind of the beauty and the character of existing buildings, and there's the nostalgia behind them and their sense of place, and the amount, what they give to a community's memories of they walk past there and that's, somebody, they were proposed to, their other half got down on their knee and they were proposed to in front of that particular house. Or, there are lots of places have meanings and have memories associated with them, and that's what's beautiful about existing buildings, that they have all these layers of history, as well as often having a lot of beautiful characteristics in themselves. So that's one of the reasons that I like working with older buildings. But one of the key reasons from an eco point of view is that 80%, so I'm just looking down here because I've written down, there's so many facts and figures and I don't keep all the facts and figures in my mind. So I've got written down on here that it's 80% of homes that we will be living in by 2050 in the UK have already been built. And given that the building regulations standard was only started in 1985, then the vast majority of those buildings were built not even complying with even the most basic of building regulations. And although building regulation standards are much higher than they once were, they're still nowhere near as high as they could be, and they're just really a very basic set of criteria to meet. So if you really are really serious about achieving a more sustainable and more eco home, you really need to go above and beyond the basic building regulation standards, because you can achieve so much more. If you go up to, say, for example, passive house standards, which is far, far better, the benefits are incredible. You know, the amount of energy that's needed to heat your home is so low, which means that your gas and electricity bills are going to be incredibly low as well. And the comfort levels are much higher. And although I'm not a passive house designer, I do, where I can, I incorporate passive house detailing and levels of insulation, and I really think it's very important to follow those sort of fundamental passive house principles, because you're going to get a much better quality of space to live in, and you're going to enjoy it so much more. And that to me is why it's important to build in a more sustainable and eco way. You've got better buildings. The buildings are better. They're better to be in. They're better to sleep in. They're better to run around in. They're better to sit and eat in. There's so many benefits to being in an eco building, over and above, all of the benefits to your pocket and your your impact on the world as a whole, which are also important things. But your quality of life is going to be massively improved by living in a more eco building. So I think it's really important for us to focus on upgrading the buildings that we already have, which is why I work so much with existing buildings. Although I'm not averse to working with a new build, I'm happy to work on new builds. I love new builds too, but they're completely different. And so when I follow this more of a fabric first approach, where I'm talking about, by that I mean things like using greater levels of insulation, cutting out coal bridges between, so you get junctions between inside and out places where your insulation is not continuous, and you get gaps, so then you lose a lot of heat just in those locations. That's where you tend to get condensation occurring, you get mold growth, you get all sorts of nasty problems happening. So those sorts of things that you can do with the walls and the roof and the floor itself, the fabric of the building, rather than the technology add-ons. I am not very interested in the PV rays and the solar thermal system and all of those sorts of things. Although I think they're great, I think it's much better to design out the need for lots of complicated technology first. And then, these things are nice to have add-ons, but if you don't actually essentially need them, you've got a house that is orientated correctly, you can get solar gain from the sun, so you're heating up your house naturally from the warmth of the sun without actually having to turn any heating on. Those sorts of approaches, I think it's far better for us to do that, so we're using nature as in the best way it can be used, without having to tack on extra bits and pieces, which, technology is great. I'm not a technophobe. Well, sometimes I can be a bit of a technophobe, but that's I'm really cautious about adding on technology that is going to break down. It's not going to last as much. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be expensive to run, expensive to maintain, constantly require servicing, and you're going to have to replace it. Whereas the walls and the roof and the floor, the ground floor of your home, they're pretty permanent. So I think it's much more important to get those right. And then, you can add on bits of technology if you want to as well, but get the basics right first. So that's to me what fabric first is about. And so when you're working with a new build, you can really start to do things that you can't do so easily when you're working with an existing building. So for example, you can look at the orientation of your building, so you can see, which way is north, which way is south. You can have fewer windows to the north and more windows to the south, so you're getting more solar gain. You do need to, design in such a way as well that you're avoiding overheating. That can be an issue, and potentially in the UK with climate change, that is going to become more of an issue. But certainly at the moment, getting more warmth from the sun into your home is a benefit most of the time. I think more problematic maybe for evenings. West, the warmth that you get from the west is much higher, for example, than what you get from the east. So there are lots of things you can do just on the basis of which direction you put the most windows. How you treat that wall. So have fewer windows to the north, have more windows to the south, east and west. But then add in additional ways to create shade when it's really hot. I mean, you can do that very simply by planting some deciduous trees outside your house. So in the hottest parts of the year, in the summer, those trees are going to be full of leaves, and then in the winter when it's colder, the leaves will have fallen, so you'll get more of the solar gain that you wouldn't get, you'd be protected from in the summer. So those are really simple ways that you can work with nature, with the sun and with plants and it sounds really like woo, kind of, a bit of a hippie dream, living with nature, but it's true. It's been proven, it's been done. And it's easy to do. It is relatively easy to do. Choose to put some windows on the south-facing wall and plant a tree in front of your house. That's not a hard thing to do. But you can't do that so much when your existing house is already built. You've got your windows where you've got them. And if you've got lots more windows to the north than you have to the south, then it's a case of having to work with what you've got. So you've got a lot less flexibility around following a fabric first approach when you're dealing with an existing building. So it's a lot more tricky. In some ways it's more interesting because you have to you have more challenges to overcome. But it's there's a passive house certification for retrofit of existing buildings called retrofit. So there are basic principles that you can follow as well when you're just dealing with retrofit projects too. Of course, you can't necessarily completely reorientate your house, but you can, if you're extending, you can make some alterations. But it's all about improving the performance of the walls and the roof, and so you're preventing the heat escaping, and ideally you want to be working with things like thermal mass to balance out the highs and lows of any sort of solar gain. These are all kind of natural approaches and natural ways that you can manage heat gain, heat loss, just using the sun. And it's kind of difficult to explain it to you in simple terms. And obviously it depends on the exact building, the situation, but there is so much you can do with an existing building. And even more that you can do with new build. So I hope this hasn't been too confusing. If you feel like you have a better understanding of Fabric First, I'd love to know what your interpretation of Fabric First is, and what you think of add-on technologies. And yeah, I feel like I'm going to go in the danger of going into waffle now, but I'll just leave you with a few more facts and figures. So because the UK has a legally binding climate change target to meet by 2050, it's understood that needs us to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions, or basically decarbonize all of our existing buildings, because at the moment housing accounts for, depending on who's doing the calculations, the lowest figure that I found is 14% of total UK greenhouse emissions. So that is really quite a significant proportion, and to be able to meet our climate change targets, we have to upgrade the existing buildings that we have and make them less impactful on the environment. And it can be done. Obviously there are costs involved, and really we should be asking the government to put things in place to help homeowners to do these works, because in some cases they can be quite disruptive. But if you are someone who's lucky enough to be able to afford to build yourself an extension and improve your home in other ways, then I really think, you know, partially it's your responsibility to improve your home, but really it's going to benefit you so much to make your home more eco-friendly. It'll be a lot more comfortable, and in the long term it's going to cost you a lot less for your heating bills, certainly. So why not do it? It's going to be of great benefit to you. I'll leave that with you, and I look forward to speaking to you again next Friday. Bye for now.